Choosing the perfect tool for your webinars is, without doubt, one of the most difficult decisions anybody has to make in purchasing a piece of software. And I don't think that there's an easy way to do it. I think in order to choose the right piece of webinar software, you have to do a deep dive into that tool. And we are here to help you today. We are going to take a deep dive into Demio on dottotech. Steve Dotto here. How the heck are you doing this fine day? At dottotech, we make technology easy so you can do more. Now, today we've got something special planned for you. We're going to take a deep dive into the webinar tool Demio. Now, a little bit of a backstory. We have a product here on dottotech called Webinar Palooza that you can sign up for, where you can learn about the strengths and weaknesses of the most popular webinar platforms. It's a little mini course that you can go through, and currently we have 6 webinar platforms included in the mix of tools, and we're constantly adding to it. Now, we take you through how do you enroll, how to set up these different tools, and as I say, the strengths and weaknesses. But we also do deep dives into what it's like actually delivering webinars with these tools. Now, when I do a deep dive into a webinar tool, I don't just do a single webinar, but instead we use the tool for a full month for our weekly webinar Wednesdays, where we do unique webinars each and every week on Wednesdays, ironically enough. And that's what we've just completed with Demio. We've just completed a month of really putting Demio through its paces. And I'm going to share with you now what I've learned, kind of the strengths and weaknesses of Demio, so you can see whether or not it fits in your world. And the thing to understand with all webinar platforms is they're not all created equal for all people. The strengths of one webinar platform might work for you if you're, say, an online marketer, but might not work for you if you're into training or education or consumer awareness. So determining exactly what you need a webinar platform to do for you is a really important consideration. And I want you to always consider your needs and look at these platforms through that lens as I show you the tools. Let's get started. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to skim over a lot of the details in this particular video. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty of setting up the webinars and seeing how it actually performs under pressure when we deliver a webinar, sign up for the Webinar Palooza mini course. And one of the most impressive things about Demio right at the start is how easy it is to set up a webinar. I don't think, in my experience, that there's an easier webinar platform to just get up and go. Kind of, I want to do a webinar, launch it, and off you go to the races. Demio makes that really easy to do. If we go into the dashboard here, and you see the Demio dashboard is very clean, it's very simple, it just gives you the basics. And I think if we kind of look at Demio overall, one of the real kind of things that stands out to me is it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles. It's got a lot of really standard things that I think you need, but it doesn't have a lot of extras cluttering it up. So it's a very clean interface. It's a very clean tool to use and straightforward. But it doesn't have a lot of the kind of small little features that you might look for, that kind of the wow factor that some of the other tools have. Creating a new event, you just simply start by going click add a new event, and it creates the event for you quickly and easily. You set the date of the event. Let's just set it for a few days here in the future as we start here. Set the time, set your time zone, and at that point, you've got to give it a title. And as soon as you click continue, you've actually got a webinar ready to go. You've already got a registration URL for it. You haven't added a description or any of your preferences, etc., but you're ready to go. It's that quick and easy to get started with setting up the webinar right out of the gate. A couple of little things to consider as you're setting up your webinar. In the webinar preferences, for some reason, Demio sets the chat in the webinar the default at private. I don't know why they do this. It's a bit of a curiosity to me, because I consider chat to be one of the most important elements within a webinar, adding so much energy and so much vibrancy to the live event itself. You're kind of replacing a lot of what we lose by having an online event, by giving people kind of a physical interaction with other people, which creates, I think, tremendous energy in a webinar. And they've always got it set to private. And the first time I launched a webinar, I was confused because I couldn't figure out how to enable the chat from the interface. So you have to make sure here to set this over to public, and I would recommend Demio gives us the option to set that as a preference, to always set up our chat for private. Certainly if you, for public, excuse me. Certainly if you follow the way that we teach how to do webinars, chat's always a big part of it. The second feature here is very cool. Is how do you allow you to redirect attendees after your webinar. So if you're doing a marketing webinar or a sales webinar, often you have a call to action where you're sending somebody within the webinar. This is a cool little additional feature that allows you to redirect people to that URL when you close the webinar down. One thing about Demio is there's no kind of soft ending to the webinars. As soon as you click stop the webinar, it's gone. It just disappears. The chat stops, everything stops. The screen completely disappears from people, and then they go to either a thank you screen or you can redirect them to another URL. And that's a great way to send them to a sales page or to send them to an opt-in page for whatever it is you're talking about in the webinar, if you're in the marketing space, for sure. Here's where you also add extra co-presenters and moderators, that sort of stuff. Demio allows you to have multiple co-presenters on, and it's a nice seamless interface to bring them on. It's a good multi-presenter platform. There are no issues as far as having multiple people on screen and being able to engage in the webinar. This is one of the things that I really like about Demio, and I wish more webinar platforms would have this. It's called the Demio System Check, and you get this access to this kind of analytic several different places within Demio. But what it does is it, first of all, tests your audio and video input to make sure that all of your physical assets are working correctly for the webinar, and you can see it all working here. But this is the one that I really like. The speed test. It goes through and it checks your connection and makes sure that your upload and download links from your internet connection are robust enough to be able to deliver a good quality webinar. And if there are any issues, they will tell you. They say, I'm awesome, I have a great internet connection, as I should. I have fiber to the wall. But that's a thing that you always want to check, because there are enough variable issues that cause webinars to go off the rails. And if your upload or download link, if you aren't getting a proper feed going through from your computer, then of course there's going to be trouble for everybody else downstream, and it's really important that you know that going into it. One of the nice aspects of using Demio as our daily driver for a full month meant that we got to set up full integration with our CRM. In our case, we use Infusionsoft to manage all of our email addresses and our newsletters and all of our accounts and sales. So we integrated Demio with Infusionsoft so that when people register for the webinar, that registration would then carry through and sync with Infusionsoft. Now, the process of registering people for multiple webinars involves quite a few different steps. The first one, of course, is you set up a registration page where people register, you capture their name and email address, and then you have to send them notification that they are properly registered and give them the links to be able to attend the webinar. And at the same time, you should be taking that information and, as I was mentioning, migrate that information into your CRM so that you can contact those people in the future and you can add them to appropriate lists, etc. So all of that's done through systems integrations within Demio. It's pretty easy to set up, pretty standard, no better or worse than anybody else's integration that has, full integration. But if we look at the pieces of that puzzle, the first piece of that puzzle is the registration page, is the actual landing page where people register. And in that case, Demio is just okay. It's not a real superstar as far as the registration goes. It's got a very pedestrian and basic registration page itself that basically says the name of the webinar, the date that it's going to appear, and allows people to register and captures their information. It does a good job of syncing that information through, but it's not really what you'd call exciting. It's not grabbing people. If you want to create a more compelling landing page that's going to encourage people to register for your webinar and tell them a little bit more about your webinar, you can go in and you can launch an editor that they have included in Demio. Now, a lot of other webinar packages really up the game here, and they leave Demio in the dust. They've got really nice landing pages that are very compelling, that are set up as templates. In Demio, you've basically got to go in and you've got to build out your landing page yourself, or I think in the case of if I was to be using Demio on an ongoing basis, I would use this feature here, an embed code that would allow me to take the registration module and put it on my own landing page. And we would create that in another web tool to develop more compelling invites for people to register. So that's an area that I would say Demio is really pedestrian. It doesn't do a super job. And to be fair, quite a few other webinar platforms don't do a great job in this space either. Now, once you've gone through the effort of getting people to register for a webinar, which is a lot of work, it's really good to get them to show up to the webinar as well. And to make sure that people show up, to increase your attendance rate, you want to do some follow-up emails, and you want to make sure that people get reminders and notifications that the webinar is coming up, because sometimes they've signed up several days before and then they forget. So we all set up some sort of a reminder sequence to let people know that the webinar is indeed coming soon. And Demio, again, has, just like I mentioned off the very top, they really sort of do a minimum viable product as far as their email autoresponder sequences that they allow you to deliver. For example, you can't determine the timing of webinar notifications going out. They have it preset with an instant confirmation when people register, which is good. And they add all the short codes for you, meaning that they put in all of the links, including the person's name to personalize it, and the time of the webinar that they all draw from your original setup screens. So it's really easy to do this process of setting up your follow-up email sequence, but you're limited by what you can do. Here you can see we can have a 24-hour notification, a 1 hour, and a 15-minute notification, and that's it. Now, we can customize those notifications with the verbiage that we use and the text, etc., but we can't send a follow-up email after the webinar, for example, nor can we send one, say, 12 hours before if we thought that was, in our sequence, that was something that was really worth doing. So they really limit what you can do. They give you the basic things that we should do, but they don't give us a lot of flexibility as far as that goes. So if you wanted to, say, send a follow-up email to your community, then you're going to have to use your own email autoresponder, meaning that integration, bringing the people from the webinar platform, signing up for the webinar, into your email autoresponder, be it MailChimp or, in my case, Infusionsoft, is very important, making sure that they're properly tagged so you can send a follow-up email. So that's something to consider as you set your webinar strategy and you put pieces in place. One thing Demio does is they do maintain a really solid database of all of the people who sign up for your webinars. And you can see we did a month worth of webinars, and we had about 3,200, 3,300 unique people sign up for those webinars. And I can export this entire list as an email list, which is useful because if I haven't set up integration with my CRM, I can import all of the names into a CRM then so that I can email to those people. Or even better, you can take these names and you could create a custom lookalike audience for doing online marketing such as Facebook, where you can get people that look similar, or you could even market to these people through Facebook, the ones that are signed up with the same email address on Facebook at least. So it gives you some additional options as far as your online marketing because of how they manage the contact database for you as well. That's pretty useful. Now, once you go live with Demio really shows its capability. Now, Demio is based on WebRTC, meaning it's a browser-based delivery where you are, regardless of what web browser people are using, they can view it without having to download a dedicated application. Now, it's a two-edged sword using browser-based webinar tools because everybody's web browser is configured slightly differently, and web browsers are constantly being updated and changed. You will get some people who have trouble viewing your webinar, depending on what browser they had. And we never had any consistent issues, but we had constant issues. Every webinar that we delivered of the 4 live webinars, somebody had an issue with Demio not being able to deliver. Now, I'm going to add one huge caveat to that, is Demio supports all browsers except Safari. It doesn't support Safari, which is passing curious to me and to my community, since many of them are Mac users. But that was a big frustration that we had with Demio, was the fact that it didn't support Safari. They have an app for iOS, which we heard mixed results on. And in the Android world, they say that they have full support for browsers in Android so that people can view it on whatever browser they choose in Android. So overall, I don't think we had any more technical problems with Demio than we've had in any other webinar platform that does web-based delivery, but we did have some issues with reliability, which is really pretty much par for the course as far as current webinar technology goes. The actual delivery of webinars within Demio, as I say, very smooth. A lot of confidence that the webinar is being delivered smoothly, easy to navigate controls for the administrator and for the guests that you brought on board. A fairly reasonable and simple chat interface that adds energy for your community. A big missing part in Demio's chat interface is there's no way to easily demarc questions. Now, what happens is as a chat is going on, if you are going to be taking questions and answers at the end of a webinar, you want to be able to easily see which chat comments are questions. Otherwise, you have to scroll through the whole chat roll in order to pull out the questions. And that's an administrative nightmare when you get a larger number of people engaged in the webinar, because there's a lot of sidebar chat happening. So you're not necessarily answering every question that comes up. You could be missing opportunities or letting your community down in some ways by doing so. So I would really prefer, especially if you're doing a lot of webinars where you have Q&A, that Demio had a better notification system. Now, we hacked together our own by using the starring convention within it, but I much prefer the tools that either have a separate area where the questions appear or a way to demarc the chat as a question. And even some of them even have the ability to vote up and down the questions, which I think is absolute brilliance. But Demio just, again, it's pedestrian in that area. It just does what we need and none of the extras. And here's an area that I wish we did have a few extras. Now, as far as your other webinar assets, adding a slideshow to it, or more importantly, rolling video into Demio, big thumbs up to Demio as they allow us to roll extra video in. We love doing a style of webinar called a hybrid webinar, where I present much of the content live, but the main demo part I pre-record, I upload to YouTube or to another video service so that I can stream that in. And it's much like a TV show, a live TV show would roll B-roll in, where they've got a story that they pre-recorded that's nicely packaged and composed. That's how I do my main demo in our weekly webinars. And it's a really good system for conveying really valuable content in a compressed period of time. And while that's rolling, while that video is rolling, I go into chat and I answer questions. So I think that does something called increasing the information density. It allows me to deliver more content in a shorter period of time, respecting my community's time. And Demio does support that very, very well. It allows us to roll video in, and it's an effortless process of actually inserting the video. Although on a technical aspect, a few people had to refresh their browser or even click on the play button again, which would appear in their video delivery screen. But overall, as I say, a big thumbs up for Demio on how it handles webinar assets. Now, we had typically between, I guess, about 180 and 300 or maybe 320 people in the room with us delivering our webinars, and we found Demio to be just fine handling that size group. Now, once the webinar is over, then you either want to take that webinar and you want to convert it into an evergreen product, or you want to be able to download it and use some of the video for other projects. And Demio supports both of those tasks quite well, that you can download the video, or you can convert it into an evergreen product, even having people continue to register for it and allow people to view the replay. But Demio also does something that I consider to be really important, is they have reasonably good analytics. If you are consistently delivering webinars and you want to improve, you want to see what the performance of those webinars is. Now, you get a lot of feedback live from your community, but the actual webinar reports are also really valuable. Here are the report from the last webinar that we delivered. We can see that it was 57 minutes long. At the peak, we had 245 people on board, and I can see as people came online, how long they stayed, where they started to leave the webinar, and then I can place that against the content of the webinar. And if I had a precipitous fall, I could say, what did I do here that caused so many people to leave the webinar? And you can learn to deliver more effective and more compelling content as a result of these sort of analytics. You can also go in and see the entire chat roll here, so you can, which I find really valuable, going through and seeing what people were saying, because when I'm presenting, I'm not necessarily seeing everything that's happening in chat. So seeing exactly what the rhythm of the conversation going on with your community, again, is a really nice thing that they've added. So again, not super elaborate as far as the analytics goes, but you're getting the basic information that you need. And that kind of brings us to the close of this Demio deep dive. So a final summary for Demio. I think Demio is a solid platform. As far as its value goes, I think it's good value. I don't think it's exceptional value, but to be fair, I don't think any webinar platform gives exceptional value at this point. They all have issues, every single platform. You're never going to find the perfect one. So finding a platform that works for you, as I've said many times, is the key. Who's Demio perfect for? I think Demio is perfect for aggressive marketers, people who are doing a lot of online marketing, producing a lot of webinars, and don't need to spend a lot of time setting up each webinar, but want to have a simple template that they can get up, go, and deliver good quality content on a consistent basis. The tools within Demio make it so easy for you to set up and deliver a webinar quickly and efficiently and manage all of the important things within that webinar. I think it's a star product in that space. If you want far more elaborate and intricate webinars with more detail in the conversation that you're having with your community, then Demio might not be the perfect platform for you, and you're gonna have to get over the issue that they have with Safari. Come on, Demio, step up to the plate. Let's make sure you're ubiquitous with all browser platforms. I think at that point there, it's a far easier purchase for everybody. Well, that's it. Our deep dive into Demio. I really would love to hear your comments. Are you using this platform? What questions do you have? This commitment to looking at webinar tools is an ongoing thing here at dottotech, and the more interaction we get from you, our community, the better I can make these videos. Now, if you found this video to be useful, entertaining, or thought-provoking, I have two favors to ask. The first is please share it with others who you think might find value in this content. And secondly, if you're not yet subscribed to dottotech, hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell to make sure you hear when we upload any new videos here at dottotech. Till next time, I'm Steve Dotto. Have fun storming the castle.